You're listening to the Study Podcast with Dr. Paul Wegner on Leviticus. I'm your host, Tyler Sanders. I'm here with Dr. Paul Wegner, and he's going to give us the Hebrew word of the day.
Oh, yeah, and we're on Leviticus today.
Yeah.
So we're finding a passage in there, and it's this one I thought was interesting because it's the word that has like a lot of different meanings. Okay, so here it is. It's not the word offering, but that first word there is, so if his offering is a burnt offering, so that word highlighted there is the word korban.
Koban?
Or kaban.
Kaban, okay.
Yeah, and it's in the New Testament as a gift or offering.
Yeah.
The other word is tamim, and tamim is the one that has like a lot of different meanings.
Oh, okay.
But in here it's translated without defect.
Yeah.
It can be used as perfect or blameless or stuff like that. So let's look at this first one. In Matthew 15, when Jesus is talking to the Pharisees, he came to Jerusalem. He said, okay, why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders, for they do not wash their hands when they eat bread? And he answered and said, well, why do you yourselves transgress the commandment of God for the sake of your tradition? For God said, honor your father and mother, and the one who speaks evil of his father or mother is to be put to death. But you say, whoever says to his father, whatever I have has been given to God, it's like a gift to God.
Yeah.
That's the word korban.
Yeah.
Is he not to honor his father or his mother, and by this invalidated the word of God for the sake of your tradition? So what they would do is they'd take this money, apparently, that was supposed to be used if their parents needed it, and they'd offer it to God so that nobody could get access to it. But apparently when they needed it, they could take it back. So Jesus says, look what you're doing. You have this offering that you're giving to God so that your parents can't use it when they need it.
Oh, my goodness.
And then now, instead, when you need it, you can take it back.
Some kind of money laundering.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
Okay, that's interesting.
And that's the same word. So
Same
in the
word.
Old Testament, it's used there, but it's the one they picked up, and in the scribes and Pharisees, used that so they didn't have to be kind to their parents.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, so I thought that's now that's not even the real word I was after.
Yeah.
And remember the next one?
Yeah, tamim.
Yeah, so it means perfect, complete, whole, and damaged, without fault. Like in Genesis 17:1, it says, then Abraham was 99 years old. The Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be tamim, blameless, perfect. It has all those possible, without defect. Some of them don't fit very well.
And whole is kind of an interesting one.
Yeah, and that's
because that's kind of a word we would have. Probably in English more like integrity, maybe. Kind of completeness, but I don't know that means like perfection, but kind of like the same. Yeah. Nothing hidden in a way, you know?
Yeah. So that's probably what this is getting at.
Yeah.
Be open with me. Be
right.
Without defect before me.
Yeah.
It's not like a sacrifice, but it means to obey me. And we're not going to be blameless, or we're not going to be sinless anyway.
Right.
Blameless you could be. You could offer sacrifice and get your sin taken away.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting word there. But then here's another one. In Genesis 25:27, when the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter and a man of the field. But Jacob was a peaceful man, a tam. It's from the same root, at least as we think it is. Yeah. And it says living in tents. So the question is, what does it mean in that context? So it has a range of meanings that's quite broad. It seems like it contrasts to his brother, who's a skillful hunter, and he's instead living in tents. And I've always thought it meant more complete. He could do a lot more things. Like he could cook, he could hunt, he could do all the things.
Yeah, and I remember we talked a little bit about that when we went over that Jacob and Esau.
So I think that's what it's getting at.
That's interesting.
Yeah. But it's just funny that word is so broad in meaning that it can cover so many areas.
Yeah, and that may be, let's take a little digression here. If you're ready to talk about it. Because I think it's an interesting, it's interesting how we, in modern, Bible study, preaching, whatever it is, we use words that have a broad meaning. How should someone who's going to like teach on this, and they're maybe going through the Hebrew, and they're seeing this broad range, they're doing a translation. Like, how do you pick a I mean, I think the answer is going to say context. Like,
Context.
how do you actually work through that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. And what I wanted to tell you is that when it has that broad meaning, we call it a range of meanings.
Yeah.
So it has all those are entailed in it, but
So it doesn't have to be exclusively.
it has to be unpacked, but it'll be unpacked by hints in the context.
Yeah.
I think we have to go there. So like, remember when I said, well, it looks like it appears to be opposite to Esau being a skillful hunter, so, and then it clarifies living in tents. So it's got something to do with all of that context helping shape that word.
And the word "but" is doing some heavy lifting there, right? That's what's telling you it's
a contrast more kind of thing. Yeah. So that's, I think, the way you do it. You look for hints in the context to help shape what that word means. Now, you wouldn't do it outside of the range of meaning. So, if it, so it has this.
They're bounds.
Yeah, it has bounds. So you can't pick a meaning totally outside. But if it's within that range of meaning, you can actually use it to help shape it for that context.
Yeah.
And I think that's how words are supposed to be used. That's how we do it in English, right?
It's very naturally done in English.
Yeah. The problem is this is a language we're not familiar with, so it's harder to get to at what that basic meaning is.
And it seems like the danger would be we would just pick one that we
like,
or meet some other ends we're trying to kind of follow.
Yeah, and that's the danger.
Yeah.
Okay,
that's interesting. Tamim.
And in this case, it's Tom.
So for the second
part
example.
Of it. The Tamim may be a plural ending on that. So
interesting.
Perfects or something like that. That plural often gives it more of a adjectival kind of idea concept. So maybe that's what's going on too. All right. Okay. We're ready for Leviticus.
Into Leviticus.
All right. You thought that Numbers was the place that most people die out. I think it's probably Leviticus. I call this Leviticus the laws that lead to purity, because it seems like what God's doing is He's got this book in the Bible that tells them how to live their life, so that this nation will be unique among the other nations. Now, some of them I think are going to be to help the nation stay clean. Like keep them healthy and stuff like that. Some of the
I see.
Some of the laws probably fit that category really well.
Yeah.
But I think other ones were partially make them stand out, like
be set apart.
Yes, about the Sabbath. Keep the Sabbath.
Yeah.
The idea of that being you're set apart, you're unique. And no other nations seem to keep the Sabbath.
Yeah.
So that would be one way to make them a special people. So I kind of think that's what's going on here.
Yeah.
If you look at the first 7 chapters, it talks about laws of sacrifice. So you've got all of those different options of what are happening. That's where I think we lose people. But then it gets into, in the second section from like chapter 8 to chapter 10 is talking about tabernacle service, Aaron and his sons and what his sacrifices were and those kind of things. Then we get into chapter 3, and I call this is often called the Holiness Code, chapters 11 through 25. It's
kind of the
even in section. That section. Yeah,
it's a really big section, really.
Yeah, which covers different things like laws concerning purity or impurity, laws concerning holy living. 16 through 25 is usually more specifically thought to be the holiness code thing.
Yeah.
And in chapter 26, you've got these covenant blessings and cursings, and then what looks like in chapter 27, almost like an appendix, it talks about laws concerning vows and gifts, which seems like, okay, how does that fit with the rest of the things? But it was how do you respond to things that you've done or said to God? And like a vow is something you've made before God.
Okay.
Well, how is that to be dealt with? And we'll look at that and see.
And is the type of vow kind of limited between a person and God? Not necessarily vows between people, or is it?
Yeah. Usually it's between God and the people, but I think it could probably be between other people. But usually it was between God and them.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. So that's where we're starting.
Okay.
There's no author that stated who wrote the book, but in the book, you have the phrase, and God said to Moses over 25 times. So it certainly sounds like Moses is the main character, and God's speaking to him to give him guidance on how to live, okay? There's little reason to believe it was not written by Moses. or he had it written, one of the two, could have done that. Some argue that the book is post-exilic, but the book of Ezekiel assumes a knowledge of the law, and Ezekiel is clearly post-exilic. So it seems like it's got to precede it somehow.
Yeah.
And then some of the laws do not fit the context of a post-exilic community. So it seems like I doubt it's
Has
that
to be
late.
older than that.
Yeah. Okay, so those are some guidelines. It's similar to the ancient Near East in others' cultures. It contains the idea of ritual purity, which is throughout the ancient Near East, and animal sacrifices was a common thing throughout.
Sure. Yeah.
Ceremonial washings and anointings or purification rituals were also practiced outside of Israel. Sacrifice of both animals and humans was practiced throughout the ancient Near East. Notice I said and humans. Remember, that was not in Israel, but that was right. The rest. And then Canaanites offered peace offerings and burnt offerings similar to the Hebrews.
Oh, that's interesting.
So it sounds like I read a book by John Walton, who talks about the biblical context and the world that it lived in. And I think he's right, is we often pull the biblical text out from its context and assume that it was really unique. But in a lot of senses, they knew what was going on around them, and a lot of the things are similar. But there are some differences, and that's important too. The idea of direct divine revelation. See, in the ancient Near East, they didn't know what the gods wanted. Israel did. And so that's a significant difference.
That's a very big difference.
Yeah. And in monotheism.
Sure. Yeah. That would be a giant one.
Yeah. Origin and impact of sin. See, most of the ancient Near East, sin wasn't even an issue. The idea of moralness, they didn't really have that concept. And certainly the gods weren't necessarily moral.
So what was their problem then? That they had upset a deity?
Yeah, that's usually what it was.
Yeah.
They made the deity mad for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ethical and moral nature of the biblical or the Hebrew religion, and that's going to be crucial.
Yeah.
Yeah. Be ye holy, for I am holy. That's
Yeah.
a key phrase in Leviticus specifically.
Yeah.
Holy and righteous nature of God, and that's really important because
those two are probably related then. Really.
Yeah. And then prohibition of human sacrifice. So
that's good.
That was for our sake. Yeah. So those differences really make Israel stand out, and that's why I think Leviticus is important for seeing it against its context, and here's this nation that's going to be different.
Yeah.
So I think that's helpful. Leviticus is basically a manual for holiness. The material is ordered logically, probably following the tent of meeting in Exodus chapter 40. So remember, you had this place where Moses would go in and talk with God. Right after that, you've got this book that talks about how to be, how your relationship with God should be, and how you should offer sacrifices and things like that. So it's important, I think, that it follows there.
Well, it's interesting to have holiness be such a big emphasis, I think, with the book of laws. Because I think normally we would think of a book of laws is there to help you. Maybe it's to be moral, but I think probably it's more like how to be a good citizen.
Yeah, not to hurt each other.
Like how to be a member of the state, kind of, in some way.
Yeah.
And to kind of have some kind of fairness or whatever. But holiness is kind of a specific, that's a narrower target, I think, really.
I think you're right. Yeah. And then 11 through 16 talks about purity issues. 17 through 24, practical guidelines so Israel be set apart from other nations. And then 26 and 27 explains stipulations of the covenant relationship. Remember those curses and blessings, and then the vows. All of those, in one sense, deal with a covenant relationship. How would you get a cursing? Well, you broke the covenant, and so you need to be punished for that.
Yeah.
So I think those make some sense in the way they're arranged. What I'm going to do now is just show you a little about how the book is kind of arranged. We've got 7 chapters that talk about basically different sacrifices. And basically, it goes through and tells you how those sacrifices are to be offered. So the first one's a burnt offering. Kind of the most general kind of sacrifice seems to be a burnt offering.
Yeah.
It was propitiation to satisfy the wrath of God against sin. And usually it was for general sin, okay? Verse 3 says, if his offering is a burnt offering from the herd, okay, it should be a male without defect. In verse 10 it says, well, if his offering is from the flock, it's a sheep or a goat, for burnt offering shall be a male without defect. So it's actually going to go through and give you, okay, if you offer this sacrifice, here's the requirements on what it's supposed to be like. If you do this sacrifice, you've got different requirements. Verse 14, but if this offering from the Lord is a burnt offering from birds, then you should bring the offering from the turtle dove or from a young pigeon. So it's kind of interesting. The structure of that chapter goes through and says exactly how these offerings are supposed to be offered.
Because there's
and
some
what
options
kind.
in a sense.
And that's actually pretty good too, because then,
Yeah.
like, certainly a bull or something like that's going to be more expensive than a turtle dove or a pigeon.
Right.
So anybody could offer this, whether you're really rich or very poor.
Right.
And that, I think, I like that in that now we've got laws that anybody can do, depending, a sacrifice they can offer.
Right.
So I like that. Okay, a meal or tribute offering. It was for general thankfulness for first fruits. Leviticus 2:1 says, now when anyone presents a grain offering as an offering to the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour. He shall pour oil on it and put frankincense on it. He shall bring it to Aaron's son, the priest, and he shall take from his handful of fine flour and its oil with all its frankincense, and the priest shall offer it up in smoke as a memorial portion of on the altar. An offering by fire is a soothing aroma to the Lord. So it once again shows you how it's to be done and what kind of things were supposed to be done. In the same category, if you bring an offering of grain baked in an oven, then he's going to tell how it's supposed to be made. Or verse 5, if your grain offering is made from the griddle, again, how do you take care of it? Verse 7, if your grain offering is made in a pan. So it's kind of interesting. The grain offerings didn't say, different kinds of things. It was all how it was made.
How is it prepared?
Yeah. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
All right. No grain offering of the Lord shall be made without, or no grain offering which you bring to the Lord shall be made with leaven. So because that's going to be an issue later, that leaven is going to become an issue or a symbol for sin.
Yeah.
So even at this time, he's laying the groundwork for that, it seems like. 14, if you bring in a grain offering of early ripened things to the Lord, you shall bring fresh heads of grain roasted in fire, grits of the new growth for the grain offering for your early ripened things. So again, he's explaining how these different offerings are to be made,
how they function
from the different offerings that could be made.
Yeah.
Okay. I just thought that was interesting.
It is, yeah.
A peace offering. A peace offering is more for fellowship. Thank offering for unexpected blessings, vows, offering for deliverance, a free will offering for general thankfulness. So this one's more out of thankfulness to God.
Yeah, gratitude, yeah.
Okay? Leviticus talks about this again in chapter 3. All right, if it comes out of the herd, how's it supposed to be dealt with? If it comes from the flock in verse 6.
Yeah.
It was funny, that one, the peace offering, there were only several options. I was surprised there was it more, but remember, a peace offering is not something you had to give, like some of those others.
Oh.
So it didn't need to have so much of a variety, I don't think.
Yeah.
But it could either be a bull or a heifer on the herd, and the flock would be a lamb or a goat. It makes that pretty clear.
Yeah.
All right. Then we got the sin offering. It's interesting on this one. It's now if it's an individual, if a person sins unintentionally, it should be a bull. If it's for the whole congregation, it's supposed to be a bull. If it's a leader sins, it's a male goat. If it's a common people, it could be a female goat or a female lamb. So it was interesting, depending on who did the sin, how it was, what kind of offering was to be offered. The next one is a guilt offering. And this one is really interesting because this one hasn't got so much to do with him doing the sin as if the person didn't know they did it. Okay? So this one, and if it's hidden from him, notice it says that, or the second in verse 17, though he is unaware. So this is a person who's offered a sacrifice or committed a sin but didn't know they did.
Yeah.
And then later they find out they did. They're still held guilty for it, but they have to offer a sin or a guilt offering.
Kind of offering,
for something they didn't know they did wrong, but they actually did.
Interesting. Yeah.
Do you remember in Isaiah 53, the type of offering that 53, I'm convinced is the Messiah?
Yeah.
But the offering that he was offering was a guilt offering. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I think so.
And the logic was, a person doesn't realize that they've sinned against God until the Holy Spirit comes and convicts them. And then they realize that what they've been doing has been sin.
Yeah.
So they need an offering that will take care of it, and the Messiah is the one that provides that offering for them.
Right.
So that's why I think a guilt offering is kind of a neat offering, because it's the kind of thing that at some point you don't know you're doing something, but you don't know it's wrong.
Right.
Then you find out it is, and then you need an offering for that. And the guilt offering is apparently the thing that's for that.
Yeah, that's very fascinating.
And that fits
setup is very interesting.
Yeah, that fits our understanding
our
of
needs. Yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that was fun.
Yeah.
All right. There's a whole chapter on what parts the priest can eat and how they sacrifice it. Yeah, a whole chapter on that. Yeah, the entails of the lamb or sheep or something. And it was funny that a whole chapter is on that.
Yeah.
I think what's also interesting is that the priest could eat part of the sacrifice. That's actually going to be important later at one of the passages we talk about. But I think it's important to realize God didn't require them to burn up everything. Some parts were totally burned up, but not all of it.
Right.
And so that's a way that the priest could be kept alive, make sure they had something to eat.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So, all right. Chapter 8, we've got laws concerning tabernacle
like a
service.
second section, basically, we're starting, right?
Yeah. And this one's more dealing with how does those sacrifices we just talked about and things like that, how do they now get worked out in real life? And so remember, we're going to need Aaron, high priest, and his sons to actually offer these sacrifices.
Right.
So it's a brilliant step from one right into the next one. Yeah. Aaron's sacrifice in chapter 9 talks about how he's supposed to offer it. Remember, he's the high priest, so he has specific offerings that he offers for himself and then for the people. And then in chapter 10, they have Nadab and Abihu. And remember, it says they offer strange sacrifices to the Lord. It's here in verse 10:1 says, "Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, took their respective fire pans, and after putting fire in them, they placed incense on it and offered strange fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And the fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord."
Wow.
Now remember, we're just out of a passage that tells them how to do it.
Right.
We just got done with 7 chapters explaining the kind of sacrifices, how to offer them. Then we got a whole chapter on how the priest should do it and all that. And now these guys go and do it wrong.
Yeah.
So I'm going, what's the purpose of this? Well, I think it's pretty clear.
Yeah.
If you guys do it wrong, I just told you how to do it right.
Right.
If you do it wrong, here's the consequences.
Yeah.
I can imagine Abihu and Nadab going out and saying, okay, I know God told us to do it this way, but I want to do it this way.
Yeah.
I'm going, what are they thinking?
Well, and it's kind of demonstrating obedience is kind of a positive and negative thing. It's not just don't do this specific thing, but it's do this in a specific way.
Yeah.
That's really what obedience is in this case.
Yeah. So I just thought that was interesting. We got a really good example of what not to do.
Yeah.
But it's crucial at that perfect point, I think.
Yeah.
All right. The rest of that chapter is chapter 10 has 16 through 20 in it. And these passages at first didn't make any sense to me. But let me see if I can help you. Verse 16 says, "But Moses searched carefully for the goat of the sin offering. And behold, it had been burned up." And because remember earlier, it wasn't supposed to be burned up. There were certain parts that were, but not all of it. Okay, Moses was angry and said, "Why did you not eat? Why did you not eat the meat of the sin offering?" And now here's Moses thinking, "I just saw Nadab and Abihu get wiped out for doing it wrong. And what are you guys thinking?" You know. Verse 19 says, "But Aaron spoke to Moses, saying, Behold, on this very day they presented their sin offering and their burnt offerings before the Lord." See, that's all they're told. My understanding is that was enough, because then Moses says, "Oh, okay, then I understand."
Yeah.
So apparently what was happening, they had already had enough to eat, and would it be any better for them to now get pigged out, eat it anyway because they told them they could? My understanding is that when you eat that much, you shouldn't have to eat anymore, so you're done. I think Moses seems to be satisfied and says, "Oh, okay, then I understand." Yeah. So my guess is that what happened is his response is, "Well, we've already done the sacrifices we were supposed to, and we've already eaten those.
Yeah.
Now we've got this left over. Should we they knew they couldn't take it outside of the camp, so
Sure,
they had
yeah.
to do something with it.
Yeah.
So burning it up seemed to be a logical move.
Interesting.
Yeah, the text doesn't tell you that, but through
Yeah.
logic, it does make some sense because Moses seems to be satisfied.
He's
then.
okay, yeah.
Yeah. So I just thought that's kind of an interesting context.
That is, yeah.
But again, Moses is really upset. They say one statement, and then he's okay with
He's
it.
okay.
So there must
Right.
be something in that statement that helps
Yeah.
him. Yeah. All right. Now we're into laws concerning holy living. So that whole first part was kind of that initial section is telling about sacrifices, explaining how they're supposed to be done, even got some bad examples and how to correct them. All right. Then we're going to go through and give all these. So this is kind of the rest of the book. So I try to explain these. So first of all, in chapter 11, we got clean and unclean food.
Yep.
And how that's structured is first it talks about things on the earth. Chews its cud, has divided hoof.
Yep.
The rest is unclean. Then it goes to the water, that which has fins and scales. The rest is unclean. And then the birds. So it's kind of interesting, kind of going through parts of the world that they lived in and told them what things they could eat and what things they couldn't.
Yeah.
So that's basically how that passage is structured.
Yeah.
So, and the logic is at the end, because I am the Lord, consecrate yourself. So the logic is these things help you to become whole, like me, or at least clean before me.
Yeah.
So I think that's the logic there. So it's interesting. A whole 10 chapters, almost 14 chapters of things on what they can eat and what they can't eat.
Yeah.
Which I think is quite amazing. I'm sorry, a whole chapter on
The whole chapter on food. Yeah.
clean things and unclean things.
Yeah.
Then I wanted you to see this because we often think of clean and unclean as being the only categories, but that's not really true. The major themes are holiness in this book, right?
Yeah.
Chapters 1 through 10 talking about approaching a holy God in worship, and then 11 through 17 are holiness and daily living, kind of. But the idea is separation. Probably the mundane from the ritual things or things dealing with God. So you actually got 3 categories. One would be holy, then you have clean and unclean. So you have a whole different category than we had before.
Yeah.
Things that are holy can be used by God in the sacrifices or things like that, or in his use.
Yeah.
Things that are clean are things that you find to eat and stuff like that. And then unclean things you're supposed to stay away from and not eat those.
Yeah.
If you have something unclean, you can cleanse it and make it clean. So if it was like let's say it's a cup or something like that, if it gets ritually unclean, you can cleanse it.
There's a process to clean it.
Yeah, and make it clean. There are some things that can go from the clean into the holy category. So specific things that are used in the temple or things like that, they can, if they get unclean, they can go down, be ritually cleansed, and once again, then be put back in the temple and be used by God.
Yeah.
If something is holy, it can be profaned, and that gets it down to the clean category.
Oh, interesting.
And if it's polluted, it'll get it to unclean.
Yeah.
So it seems like it has different levels of cleanliness. But I think what most people don't realize is that there's 3 categories, not just 2.
Right.
And one, the holy things are totally set apart for God that can't be used for any other reason.
That's what's normally happening. People collapse clean and holy into one category.
Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty interesting.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought that was helpful for you to know.
Yeah.
All right. Laws of motherhood in chapter 12. Like you have a male child, they are be unclean for 7 days. Eighth day, the child should be circumcised, and they remain in the blood of purification for 30 days. It's hard to know what that remain in the blood of purification, but apparently they were set up aside until those 30 days were over.
Okay.
But what's interesting is a female child, it was longer. Unclean for 14 days, remain in the blood of purification for 66 days. After that, the days of purification, then she was to offer a lamb burnt offering, a young pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. It says if she can't afford it, then 2 doves or a pigeon. So I actually like that idea.
Yeah,
everybody could then partake of this. What's a little unusual is why the female child rendered a mother unclean for more time. I don't know the understanding of that totally. It could be that the male children were the ones that were going to carry on the family line and things like that. Or and it could be that the female child their bodies are more complicated and allow for more things that could go wrong, maybe, and allow for uncleanness for longer.
Oh, interesting.
I really am not sure. Is something in there though?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, I opened a can of worms and don't know how to close that one. Sorry.
Yeah. It's good to point it out, though.
Yeah.
Someone listening can figure it out.
Yeah. Right. All right. So we're at the laws of tests for leprosy. Remember, leprosy is going to be a disease that's very contagious.
Yeah.
So they actually had quite a few ways of. First, they had to figure out if the person has a sore or a boil.
It's kind
or
of a diagnosis.
Burn. Yeah. What do you do with them? How do you treat them? If it actually is leprosy, then the clothes were to be torn, uncover the hair, or cover the mustache, remain unclean, must live outside the camp. So the restrictions for leprosy were really extreme.
Yeah.
But legitimately, because it was so contagious, it could be passed on to somebody else. People with garments for leprosy, if you couldn't remove it, they must be burned. So again, they wanted to get rid of that kind of thing. Now, what's interesting is leprosy was like a scary disease, right? Nobody wanted it, and it was something you had to really be careful of.
Yeah.
What's interesting, there's laws for cleansing a leper too. Remember in the New Testament when that leper got cleansed by Jesus, and he says to go to the priest and offer the sacrifices for a leper?
Right.
Yeah, well, here it is. My guess is priests probably hardly ever had to do that. So I bet they had to go back to the law and figure out how we supposed to take care of this.
Yeah.
And it was they were first to be examined, kills one bird, pours the blood of a live bird over running water, sprinkles the ex-leper 7 times, pronounces him clean, lets the bird go free, washes his clothes, shaves his hair, takes a bath. So basically he's doing all these things to make sure that it really is gone.
Yeah.
But then at the end of the day, he's going to clean their house, announce him clean. So I imagine here's this leper going to the priest and saying, I used to be a leper. I went to Jesus. He healed me and I'm no longer a leper. What do I do? And the priest probably had to go look it up and see what was supposed to happen.
Yeah.
But imagine what kind of a message that would have been to the priest.
Sure, yeah.
Here's a person cleansed of leprosy and it's something that hardly ever happens, and Jesus did it.
Right.
So I thought I like this chapter because I figure we know it happened at least once.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
All right. Chapter 15 has other discharges or secretions, like a person with a discharge is unclean. Anything they came in contact was. So again, these are probably things that they're trying to determine, is this discharge or something like that, is it serious or isn't it? Should we worry about this or shouldn't we? And so it has all these logical steps to take to make sure a person is okay and to be mixing with other people.
Yeah, sure.
So now that we've had COVID, I guess now we kind of understand more what these things are all about. All right, then 15 through 25, we've got the purpose for cleanliness laws. Actually, they're never really stated, but I think it's probably got a combination of these two, probably to teach the Israelites the difference between clean and unclean, and especially to keep them separate from the other people because they were God's people.
Yeah.
And to get that idea across to them. Now that you're my people, you're different. And so that's actually supposed to be transported even in the New Testament, right? Now that we are children of God, we are actually supposed to be different than the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So it was started in the Old Testament to give them kind of a logic of how they are different, and then I think supposed to be carried on into the New Testament to let us know how we're supposed to be different. Now, not necessarily wear different clothes or stuff like that.
Right.
But more of outward signs to show that we're different than the rest of the people.
Yeah.
So I think that's helpful. I think also some of them are for health reasons.
Yeah.
Israelites would definitely be protected by eating some of these. There's certain things they were not supposed to eat. Pork. It used to be thought that trichinosis was something that was spread really easily. You could get it from pork.
Yeah.
They've now found that probably pigs that are raised out in the wild, not cooped up, trichinosis is not such a thing you worry about. But let's say it's something like that. Let's say it's some disease that's carried. It's to keep Israel away from those so that the nation didn't die out from a black plague or something like that.
Yeah.
So I think some of them are probably for that reason too.
Yeah.
That would also, in my mind, be an example to the other nations that when they looked at Israel and they did these kind of things to keep them clean, it would probably also help them to know, oh, I wonder what that issue is. So it was almost a witnessing tool for that too, probably.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting. I think chapter 16 is probably the most important thing that's in this whole book, the idea of the Day of Atonement.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Remember, first, let's talk about what it is. It's the day that the sins are actually covered, meaning they're separated from you and the nation, and then from then on, for at least a second, I don't know how long it was before the next one sinned, but at least for a time, their sins were taken care of and done away. We'll talk about what it means, but first of all, let's see the process. The high priest goes into the Holy of Holies only once a year, and that's on this Day of Atonement. He must offer a bull, sin offering, plus a ram, a burnt offering, clothed in linen tunics and undergarments. He would take 2 males, one they cast the lots over.
Oh, yeah.
One is going to be the scapegoat, and one is going to be the one that's sacrificed. The scapegoat is going to be led out into the wilderness. You can see the one goat that's a scapegoat will be led out away. I need to tell you about something there. Do you see I've got Azazel?
Yeah.
In some of the Jewish writings from the it's probably well before the Middle Ages, but they started to think that Azazel was the desert demon. So if you ever hear that, I think it should be Azazel is separating those 2 words to make it goat of escaping is I think what's supposed to happen. They put the word together and thought, this is a desert demon that's supposed to. But if it's a goat that's led away, I think it makes a lot more sense. So I don't. But you might hear of Azazel, the desert demon, and I just want to make sure you have some idea where that comes from. All right. Take a handful of incense, bring it before the Lord, sprinkle the blood of the bull on the mercy seat, and do the same with the goat, and then lay the hands on the head of the other goat, confess their sin of Israel, and then lead that goat away. That's where you get that idea of the goat of escaping. They're taking the sins, putting on his head, and then leading them out.
Yeah.
My understanding is that that's giving them a real good understanding of what happens when the sacrifices are made. And I actually believe that atonement, it comes from the word kaper, atone. My understanding is kaper means to cover legitimately. And I think what it's getting at is the blood of the bulls and goats covers the sin so that the person committing the sin is not held guilty for them anymore. They're separate from them.
Yeah.
That's how I understand these sacrifices to work.
Yeah.
My understanding is that those sins don't ever get taken away until Jesus dies on the cross. And then I talk about it, then they're obliterated.
Yeah.
But before that, they need to be covered until, because Hebrews tells us that the blood of bulls and goats really doesn't take away the sins of people, right? But what it does, I understand, is to cover it so that at some point Jesus can actually then take those sins away.
Right.
So that's how I understand the Day of Atonement to be such a crucial
covering.
And plus a crucial understanding of what happens when a sacrifice is made for your sins.
Right.
And that Day of Atonement, at least for a little while, they are now pure before God until they start sinning again.
Yeah.
But I think that Day of Atonement was a beautiful picture of helping them to understand what takes place and how they are separated from their sins and the idea of leading those sins away, I think was by New Testament time, at least they tell us, I don't know if this is correct, but they tell us that by New Testament time, they were killing the goat to make sure he didn't ever wander back into the camp. Imagine what picture that would be, right?
Right.
So I don't know if they're right, but it would make some sense. All right. So I wanted you to know about the Day of Atonement because it seems like to me it's crucial to the rest of crucial to our understanding of New Testament, I think, too.
Yeah.
So, all right. More in chapter 17 talks about no eating or drinking of blood because that's going to be crucial for later. Sacrifice must be killed in the tabernacle so that the blood would be offered to God. They are not to offer any sacrifices to the goat demons. Okay, of course not. But
Yeah.
my guess is that must have been a problem, or why would they have even brought it up?
Yeah.
Right? No Israelite was to eat the blood of the sacrifice, because that's going to be crucial for later on, the importance of the blood of Jesus taking care of our sins too.
Right.
So I think that helped him. Talked about the life of the flesh is in its blood. If anyone does eat an animal with its blood in it, they must bathe, wash their clothes, and be unclean until evening. If he does not, he shall bear his guilt. So it was really important that I suppose it could happen by accident. You eat an animal and it had blood in it, and so it had to be there had to be a way of making it all right if it was done by accident, I'm sure. So that's, I think, it's really crucial. This whole chapter, though, makes it really important, tells you about the importance of blood.
Yeah.
And I think that's crucial for later.
Yeah.
Chapter 18 is talking about sexuality. I am the Lord your God. The Israelites must not do what is done in Egypt or Canaan. That was anathema. So you didn't approach a blood relative. And the word is to uncover their nakedness.
Yeah.
I could have done that for your Hebrew word of the day. But that apparently means, like, a father's nakedness would be his mother. So to see the nakedness of a mother would be actually talked about as being the father's nakedness because of their relationship. Yeah. Huh. And then it goes through and shows all the relationships they were not supposed to have.
Yeah.
And I think the reason is because that's what happened in these other nations, you know, in Egypt and Canaan, and they were wrong. They were not supposed to be doing that.
Yeah.
Again, it says, because I am, that seems to be the logic as to why you don't do those kind of things. Yeah. It's because I'm your God, I am holy, you don't do those. And then it talks about the land to which you were going did these things, and if they do them now, they'll be removed from it too.
Right.
So it makes it pretty clear.
Yeah.
So that chapter is probably going to be pretty important. Laws of the priests, remember, the priests are going to be a special category of.
Yeah, right.
So they had some really strict guidelines on what a priest could do and couldn't. Like some of them, they could not marry a harlot or a divorced woman. So it made sure that they were separate. They were different.
Right.
Couldn't defile yourself with a dead person unless they were very close to them, like a father or mother.
Yeah.
Do not make baldness or shaving the beard or any cuts on themselves. Remember, that's what the Canaanites did, apparently gashed themselves to make Baal more sympathetic towards them. And he says, don't do that. That's not what you need to do.
Right.
Stay away from uncleanness. So it goes all the way through and explains how, okay, here's a priest. You're going to be different than the rest of the people, and these are the guidelines to make sure you are different.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting, helpful, I think. Chapter 23 to 25 talk about the major feasts in the calendar.
Yeah, there's a bunch.
Yeah, and my understanding is that this is part of the Sabbath rest. They did these sacrifices not only to worship God, but also to give them celebrations during the time. Yeah. Like some of them to celebrate harvest or the destruction of the temple. They commemorated it. Some of these, it's interesting, they were only added later. There was 3 that for sure were early, but then some of these others apparently were added later so that they knew. So like the Day of Atonement, that one's always going to be there. But but like the Feast of Ab for the destruction of the temple, a time of mourning and fasting.
Yeah.
Dedication, the restoration of the temple, Purim lots. So some of these are clearly late ones.
Yeah.
So, all right. There was not only a Sabbath rest for like holidays and stuff like that, but also the people and the land were to have a Sabbath rest. Right. So there's even some that, like the year of Jubilee, where every 7th year the land was to go fallow, and then in the 14 between the 49th and the 50th year, you had that year of Jubilee where everything laid fallow again.
Yeah.
So it was interesting, and it happened to people, but also to the land.
Yeah.
And Jeremiah actually claims, 25 actually claims that the reason they're going into exile is because they didn't do the Sabbath rest for the nation or for the land.
Yeah.
So they're going to be removed from it for 70 years so that they are going to, actually, the term is 70 years, even though to get 70 years it's different at different times, how you figure it out.
Yeah.
But the thing that is really important is that it links it with, because you didn't do it to the land, they're going to get their Sabbath rest.
Right.
So it's interesting.
Yeah.
All right. Then you've got these covenant blessings and cursings, require no idols, keep my Sabbaths,
course,
reverence
yeah.
for my sanctuary, all those. Then he gives him all these. I'll give you rain, so that you can have your food. You'll eat and you'll be secure in the land. I'll give you peace in the land. No harmful beasts or sword will come. The enemies will fall before you, and you will be fruitful and multiply. So, again, he says all these blessings for how what they're going to receive, but they're all seem to be very similar to that covenantal relationship that they have with him.
Yeah.
Remember, he makes that on Mount Sinai. Now
Right.
he's getting these logical connections as to how to obey this God.
Yeah.
So my understanding is it's connected, and blessings and cursings are often connected with covenant relationships.
Right.
So I think that's what's going on. And then I am the Lord who brought you out of the land of Egypt. So he gives the reason why you're to do all these things is because I've taken care of you so far.
Yeah,
and
right.
that's part of a covenant. Usually, it talks usually about the history between the two
sure.
people.
Yeah.
So, and then cursings, he's got all these. If you reject these standards in the covenant or break them, here's all the things that are going to happen. One, your enemies will rule over you. You'll flee when no one's pursuing. All of these. It talks about your land's going to lie pestilent. You're going to send pestilence. But the 14th one is you shall go into captivity. He had already told them what was going to happen if they disobeyed him, and so it should have been an obvious thing that captivity was coming if they didn't obey. But it doesn't seem like they got it,
And it happened.
Yeah, so it's interesting.
Yeah.
But it also, there's hope, because it says, if you repent in captivity, I'll remember my covenant, and I will remember the land, and I will not reject them or destroy them. So, and it even talks about bringing them back to the land. So it's interesting. He's given them hope, even in the midst of, here's a covenant.
punishment.
If you break it, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
But there's hope. You can repent.
Yeah.
Okay, now we've got these appendix, I call them. It's funny. The laws for vows and gifts. Like if you do a difficult vow and you can't keep it, then there's a way to get out of it. And I thought this was interesting. Remember Jonathan and Saul? Remember Saul actually is going to kill Jonathan because he ate the honey that he found in the when they're fighting against the Philistines.
Yeah.
And so Jonathan says, "Okay, go ahead and kill me. I did what I wasn't supposed to do." And the people say, "Does Jonathan really need to die because he's had this great victory for the Lord?" In the next verse, he says, "Okay, let him go." Well, how's that happening?
Yeah.
I have a feeling that Saul and Jonathan knew about how do you get out of a vow.
There's a way to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now remember, Judges, Jephthah and his daughter. I understand that he puts her to death. And remember, I think Jephthah does it because he doesn't know about how to get out of a difficult vow. So my understanding is he grew up on the outskirts of Israel.
Yeah.
So my guess is nobody told him that if you utter a vow and he utters his vow, the first thing that comes out of my house I'll offer to the Lord.
Yeah.
Well, I think he gets caught and just doesn't know how to get out of it. So he actually does kill his daughter. So it's interesting. I think that actually helps us explain some passages in the biblical text.
Yeah.
That actually are
Where
pretty
vows can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought that was helpful.
Yeah, that is.
So there's some cost kind of things for people. There's things for animals. If you have an animal or something, you can exchange it and stuff. If there's a house, there's even a way to redeem it.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, all the various levels. Now, I don't know why this was tacked on here, but it does seem like it actually helps several times in the biblical history.
Yeah.
So I think it's important. So I assume God put it on there because it was important for them to know how to get out of a vow if you make one that you didn't realize you were making,
Yeah.
but it's going to have serious consequences.
Yeah.
You can actually take care of that. So I actually like this. I think it's really important.
Yeah.
All right, here's the questions. What's the purpose for the book of Leviticus?
Well, I think the purpose, like you said earlier, it's to direct the people to holiness.
Okay.
And it kind of explains how to actually live out the covenant relationship
Good.
between God and his people.
Good. And by doing that, it's going to be a witness to all the other nations,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Good. Okay, what do these laws reveal about Yahweh?
Particularity, you know?
Okay.
And, that he does expect obedience.
Okay, and then what about his holiness? That's going to, remember, we already talked about in the ancient Near East.
Yeah.
That certainly wasn't one that they emphasized or even knew about.
Yeah,
now
right.
it's really clear.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. How was the Hebrew law different from the other law codes?
Human sacrifices.
That's real clear, isn't it? Monotheism.
Yeah, and the idea of ethics, morality
Good.
coming in.
Yeah.
But then how that reflects God, I think, too.
Good. And then what are some of the major themes in Leviticus, and describe them? Holiness was certainly one,
Holiness
wasn't
is
it?
definitely a big one, yeah.
How about rest? Remember, for the
Oh,
land
yeah,
and
that's a
for
good one,
people?
too. Yeah.
So those are at least two major themes in the book that I think are really helpful.
Well, and you probably could even extend that to say that these themes extend throughout the rest of the Old Testament.
Sure.
Probably the whole rest of the Bible, really, but they kind of have a foundation in Leviticus.
And I'd actually argue the understanding of sacrifices and even the
Yeah,
Day of
yeah.
Atonement,
Yeah.
all those are going to be crucial.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, here's our conclusions. God chose to make Israel his people to be a light to the rest of the nations, to be a priest and how be a go-between between them. And this book, more than any other one, makes that real clear, I think.
Yeah.
And then God gives us stipulations of how a nation should live if they're going to be a good example of their God.
Yep.
And then the tabernacle was a representation of the presence of God for the Israelites. And in this one, how to deal with God seems to be real clear on how to take, how they're supposed to react to him.
Yeah.
So those, I think, are the most important things. Oh, we got a few more. Sacrifices helped them learn that sin had consequences.
Yeah.
And that's important. The Israelites broke God's covenant, but they could be repaired. And that's what these sacrifices are for.
Yeah.
So I think that's what we learned from the book.
Yeah, and I think this is I hope it's helpful for people. I think for me, why these kind of big overviews like this over a whole book can be really helpful is like if you're going through read the Bible through a year.
Yeah.
Leviticus and Numbers, those can be really tricky ones. But I think part of it is we don't have a great context necessarily of why it can feel like so many details. And if you don't know that context, it can be really hard to I don't want to say contextualize it because I keep saying context, but I think that is kind of what I mean. It's hard to put it all together and see the big picture. But seeing that big picture does help make a lot of sense out of it.
I think so.
Yeah.
So Leviticus, I think, became a pretty important book
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
for us.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so.
All right.
Well, I guess on to the next one then, yeah?
Yep.